Please listen with me to a reading from the book of Lamentations. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning, great in your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is great, is good in those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for one to hear the yoke in youth, to sit along in silence when the Lord has imposed it. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Would you pray with me? God, who welcomes us to your family through baptism, who offers a place of refuge when life does feel like a roller coaster, we come here today, open our hearts and our minds to what you want us to hear. Amen. I want to begin with a true story about Peter. He's a teacher, and his daughter, Peggy. She's 7 years old. And they're in the back of a black Toyota Camry, drenched with sweat. It's a very hot August, 1989. Now, what else I should tell you about that story is you have this mental picture. I'm going to change that picture for you. They are fearfully hidden in the back of the trunk. They are leaving East Berlin, headed towards Checkpoint Charlie. Above them are infrared scanners trying to detect any body heat, signaling the guards, and if any body heat is detected, the guards are ordered to fire at will. And so as the car leaves East Berlin, it maneuvers slightly to the left around these massive cement blocks. It goes to the right, and then it stops. And Peter wonders what's about to happen next. The trunk opens, but he can't see who has opened the trunk because the glare from the sun is so blinding. And then he hears these words, "Welcome to West Berlin." Peggy and his daughter were among the last to make that very risky trek across the bridge from East Berlin to the infamous Checkpoint Charlie, symbol of the Cold War. Over 150 people perished trying to make that same escape. For whatever reason, they believed that it was sacrificing their life. That's how bad life was in East Berlin, to make that escape over into West Berlin. And I wonder what it would mean for us if we think about Sabbath as an escape, a refuge. How busy are our lives? How imprisoned does our soul feel that it yearns to take a risk and escape over into Sabbath time? Now, our scripture reading today is from the book of Lamentations. And Lamentations is just how it sounds. It's a book of lament. And if you're ever going to have a Bible study party, just don't pick the book of Lamentations. It's not that uplifting. And Jeremiah writes at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians. He looks, and his city of hope is obliterated. Thousands are massacred, and the king and the leaders are captured and taken away to Babylon. If you think about the events in October of 1961 and the showdown that happened between East and West Berlin that caused the building of the wall to imprison a city for 30 years, if you think that was horrific, then the Babylonian captivity, which lasted 70 years, is off the chart horrific. And Jeremiah, his beloved city, witnesses everything. And I want to read to you from Lamentations, and maybe you can just hear the utter grief. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. I wonder if you've ever witnessed or seen such destruction that the only response is really words of lament. I think about those of you who were here for the 1975 tornado, the destruction that you saw and witnessed. Or more recently, the images that we still probably carry with us of 9/11. Or all the events that have occurred because people are using guns out of control. We live in a time and an age where we too can lament. But one thing I have seen after the events of 9/11 and the recent Emmanuel AME tragedy is there's something about destruction that brings people to church. As a minister, after 9/11, I was amazed at how many people came to church. It lasted about 2 months. I was living about an hour north of New York City at the time. And the church was full because people realized they needed a refuge from the chaos of the world. Lamenting is something not written in our American narrative. Instead, we are asked to pursue happiness. But sometimes that pursuit of happiness creates this reality where we are blind from racism or gun violence, or to use the words of the Pope, unbridled capitalism. How does the world affect the way we experience our inner soul? And how does the world put a blockade that we have to weave left and right around in order to experience Sabbath? In a way, the book of Lamentations reminds me of what we journey through on Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday confronts us with reality. And in a similar way, we are confronted with loss. We are aware of loss of the time that we spend with our loved ones, loss of the time that families eat with one another, loss of our glaciers, loss of time spent with our Creator. The sermon series that Jane and I have been working on this summer comes from a book called Sabbath, written by Wayne Muller, and he writes that the modern age is designed to seduce us away from the realization that we need refuge. We need Sabbath. We need that time of restoration. There's a Canadian theologian, Douglas John Hall, and he writes about how we have this frenetic quality of our culture where we are frantically going from one event to the other, treating life like it's a big to-do list. And when we live our lives like that, then how can we experience Sabbath? You have the outer world and you have the inner world. And when that outer world begins to invade the inner world, then we are definitely in trouble. How do we experience Sabbath? In our schools, we have the 3 R's, the reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I wonder what would happen if in our schools we focused on 3 different R's. Relationships, reflection, and resiliency. We're so busy looking at our screens, sending emails and texts, and engaged in social media that we've lost that face-to-face relationship aspect, so important to building community. We're so busy, we don't have time to reflect. And we respond to stresses in life in that fear or flight factor because we're not as resilient anymore, because we do not take that time to experience that inner peace. So how do you experience that inner peace? Well, I'm going to invite you to take a trek across a bridge that I think really is what is important between the outer world and the inner world, and it's simple. It's our breath. Our breath is how God brings us into the world, and it's how God calls us home. And so I invite you to just take your hand and put it on your stomach. And if you want, you can close your eyes or you can leave your eyes open. I want you to begin to be aware of that breath. Just inhale, and a deep inhale, and an exhale. Be aware of a slow inhale and a slow exhale. I'm going to ask you to do an ancient meditation with me, and to those of you who have been watching Shark Week, I apologize up front, because I'm going to ask you to think of your mind like an ocean where there are no sharks. And with each breath you take, I want you to imagine yourself going down deeper beneath the surface. And at that place, it is calm and clear, and no matter if there's storms raging on the surface or there are gigantic waves, it is calm and clear where you are. Take another big deep breath in and exhale. And as you do that, you're going deeper and deeper where it's calmer, clearer. And you look up and you're aware of your thoughts. You're aware of the to-do list you are imprisoned by. You're aware of feelings that you have, but where you are right now, it is calm and clear as you breathe in and breathe out. I ask you to open your eyes. Keep breathing, though. And remember how important that breath is, how that breath connects us, and how that breath can just calm us down. And that's how we realize that Sabbath connects us to God. Now, how do you know you really need Sabbath? And what I've done is I've thought of a top 5 list. You know you need Sabbath when you can't remember the last time you've just eaten a meal and focused on the meal and not multitasked while enjoying food. You know you need Sabbath when you hear that the church is going to have a sermon series on Sabbath and you think, that's a waste of time. I don't have time for Sabbath. You know you need Sabbath and time alone when the only time you have true solitude is when you are going to the bathroom. You know you need Sabbath when you hear that the recently escaped convict, David Sweat, was assigned solitary confinement and you are jealous. And finally, and I'm going to go a little slower because this went over the heads of the morning folks. You know you need Sabbath when you're so tired that you begin questioning the existence of God and your mind starts becoming dyslexic and you can't sleep at night And so you lay awake at night wondering if there really is a dog. Okay, good. All right. Thank you for laughing. We all need Sabbath, and believe me, I had folks after the morning service say, "Oh, that really spoke to me." You know, I'm really up here preaching to myself because I have 2 kids, and they are about as plugged into technology as you can be. My son, he's playing Xbox while watching Zach and Cody on the iPad, and then he's texting his friends and doing other things. And my teenage daughter, she texts more in probably one day than I will all year. And then my husband, I can do this because he's not here right now. I have friends that tell me anytime they want to know what I'm doing, they just check his Facebook status because he updates it a lot. And then me, I have to say, I teach online, I counsel people online, and I carry my phone with me quite a bit. So I am also speaking to myself. This idea of being addicted to the digital technology is something I struggle with as well. About a year ago, I was aware of this addiction and came across a very interesting book published by a clinical psychologist called The Big Disconnect: Protecting Our Childhood and Protecting Family Relationships in This Digital Age. It's written by Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, and she writes that never before have adults and children been so connected to the internet that we can reach out to anything or anyone, but at the same time in our own households we are struggling to maintain meaningful relationships. And it's really the parental paradox of our time. Never before have we been so connected yet so disconnected. And she observes that parents are so immersed in their smartphones and their screens that they are escaping away from being a parent, and as a result, our kids are feeling neglected. The way our children are being raised is being completely altered. And that is why the sacrament of baptism is really so timing. You as a church have committed to helping raise little Tolan, little Rosa. Look at the children around you. We can't ask the parents to do it by themselves. We as a church have to be involved. We can never be too busy for vacation Bible school or to teach Sunday school or to just pray for our children. Our youth need us. They don't need our technology. They need relationships. And we, in turn, need relationships with our Creator and with our church community. When I was young, I escaped a lot into the world of science fiction. And one of my favorite authors was Ray Bradbury, and he wrote a lot about dystopian societies, the opposite of utopian, the dystopian societies, where technology totally obliterated any relationship that people had. People were no longer communicating with one another. People were so wired into it. And I remember this short story very well because it scared me as a kid, and now it's come true. There is a short story he wrote where people are riding a bus and they're not even aware of where the bus is going because they're looking at their wrist, at their watch, and it's a TV. And now that is no longer science fiction. Ray Bradbury was very prophetic. And it reminds me of another prophet, Paul Simon, who, like Jeremiah, had a vision of a world where people were not speaking to one another, where there was silence, but it wasn't a Sabbath silence. It was a silence because no one cared. People were just out of touch, distracted. And I wonder where we are. What progress have we made? And will we make any progress towards restoring our relationships Will we make any progress towards being reflective? And will we make any progress towards being resilient to handle the stress of life? And so how do you do that? You need to risk. Risk escaping from those technologies that distract you. And you just need to breathe and listen. Shabbat Shalom.